All right. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, OKC Design and Tech community. So excited to have you here and to be here with Emily and Doji, because we've got a really great community. So today. Excited to have you here. Let's see here with just Emily and Doji announcements you may have heard before. Oklahoma City Design and Tech is let's see here with just Emily and Doji announcements you may have workshops related to user experience design, user centered design. So just Emily and Doji on Oklahoma, our sponsor, related to is a tech-centered organization that focuses on making tech education accessible to everyone in the Oklahoma area. Is a tech they provide us all the resources, focuses on making tech education accessible to everyone. In the future, when we can get together and provide us all the resources, focuses on making Oklahoma has been a pillar of everyone. In the future, when we can get together for several years, it's really important to Oklahoma that Oklahoma is a pillar of space, be a safe in the future when we can get together for several years. It's really important. Anything you see in an event, please just reach out in the future to any one of the group organizers or Oklahoma board members and let us know. That's always welcome. Let's see, we also have a Slack channel. So instead of chit chat on Twitch, we've shifted to chit chat and question asking for this talk in general in our user group on the Techlahoma Slack space. So Doji's going to put the link to our Slack space into the Twitch chat. If you are not on Twitch, you're on YouTube, then it's UG-OKC-design-tech. So you can find us there. Please join us. That's the best way to ask questions, which I'll be relaying back to Emily there at the end. So, okay, I think that's all the logistics. Today we are excited to welcome Emily Olson. She is a user experience designer out of the DC area. She graduated from the University of Notre Dame, and she's also an artist. She has a passion for creatively integrating the digital world with the physical world. She's worked worldwide in multiple roles, ranging from industrial design to creative technology, strategy, UX, UI, and to service design. She's an advocate for working with teams to develop a product strategy that focuses on the services we deliver alongside the products we create. So she's talking to us about service design, which is a specialty within design that helps organizations get out of having siloed conversations about customer experience. So thinking about the experience of just one part of the application at a time, and shifting into a wider, more collaborative perspective that focuses on the entire customer experience, that cohesive journey they go through. So with that, I will turn it over to Emily. And again, please send us your questions in Slack.
Thanks, Diane. Really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today and share my insights on service design and how it can be an effective tool in your design and technology arsenal. I really appreciate this opportunity, so I just want to thank you for having me here today. Before I jump directly in, I just want to give you a little bit more context into who I am and the company I work for, Global Payments. So Global Payments is a technology and software company delivering a commerce ecosystem to businesses small and large worldwide. We offer all sorts of solutions, both in-person, e-commerce, omni-channel, analytics, etc. And a little context on me, I started in the design world as an industrial designer working on a variety of different fields. I quickly found that I had a passion for integrating in real life products with the digital, finding that space to integrate these two modes of design. Having both that background in 3D interaction and digital interactions, I found myself consistently drawn to that intangible experience space between those two forms of design, both behind the scenes and key touch points with users. A project that really brought me into the realm of service design was a project to work on inpatient healthcare experience and communications in hospitals. And it was really based on communication between different stakeholders. I was brought into this project because of my experience with both hardware and software, but it really set me on a journey of designing that space in between, that intangible design work of service design. And when I joined Global, I was hired to lead a project that had really glaring issues with that space in between. They had this awesome software product on this new piece of hardware, but they hadn't really thought about how the product was going to be delivered, the new touch points with the new products. There was really a missing service proposition for our users. How do all of these different touch points of this product that span the entire organization come together to create one seamless service experience? We really needed to understand that end-to-end experience and then redesign the services across it to better fit our users. Additionally, when this product was first developed, we did not document or plan how our relationship with users, both internally and our customer, were going to change, or what our touch points were going to look like. I mean, it kind of this lack of documentation spanned a bunch of different products we're working on. So we really needed to understand how that fit into the context of everything else, and then design those touch points and how everything interacted together. So Global's prospect to merchants is simple, but their product environment is quite complex, with an offering of over 600 plus tools and environments that our customers can use. And it's a complex environment behind the scenes, and as it is with many large companies that have a large product offering. So this was kind of me joining that product and realizing that there were so many other touch points that I had to consider as I was working on this, and just all of the services that touched all of these different points. Also, like many traditional companies, Global is organized into your classic work silos. So you've got product, you've got marketing, you've got sales, you've got support, et cetera. And this can be really helpful given the vast size of our company and the immense amount of products that we have. But it can equally create a hard time optimizing services that touch all of these different verticals. So this is due to the nature of how one would solve problems and create in specific verticals and then hand it off to the next group in those silos, versus perhaps a more agile, multidisciplinary team that you would see at a startup or a younger technology company. Organization and some of its older product delivery practices reminds me a lot of a parable I once heard, and it's also described in one of my favorite books, Thinking in Systems. So the earliest versions of this parable of the blind men and the elephant is found in Buddhist, Hindu, or Jain texts, and they discuss the limits of perception and the importance of a complete context. The parable goes as follows. A group of blind men heard that a strange animal called an elephant was in the area, but none of them were aware of its shape or form. And out of curiosity, they said, we must inspect it and know it by touch, of which we're capable. So they sought it out, and when they found it, they reached it and felt its form. And one blind man said, this being is like a thick snake, and another felt its ear and thought it was a fan. As for another, they thought it was a tree trunk, and another described it as a rope. And the last felt its tusk, stating that the elephant must be which is hard and smooth like a spear. So what I think is interesting about this tale of limited perception also relates to where we can find ourselves in the context of our complex organizations. We know the goals and the purpose of the organization. We know what we're supposed to be delivering, but it can be very difficult to invent, create, and solve interconnected services, as the world increasingly looks for and values today, when we're just tied to these specific verticals and are set in our contexts. And in this increasingly interconnected world we live in, you can't design and develop these systems by just designing the elements of which the system are made. You really have to take a step back and design from a broader point of view. And this is where service design plays a role. So what even is service design? And how can service design solve for the gaps that this kind of business organization creates? There are a lot of definitions or ways one can frame it. But the best way I've heard it explained, and the way I use it in my own design practice, is a human-centered design approach that places equal value on the customer experience and the business process, aiming to create quality customer experiences and seamless service delivery across the board. What service design allows us as an organization to do is align the goals that might be disparate between these two different experiences. On the one hand, you have what might be best for the user, and then you also have, on the other, what might be best for the business. And a lot of times these things don't align. You can also, at many times, have groups internally that have varying goals, needs, requirements, etc. For example, if my business would like to streamline its support services to merchants by going entirely digital because it's cheaper, it's universal, it's what the business would like to do, it might then leave a whole older population of users without any other means by which they can contact support, such as older systems that we used to have by phone or by person. So you have on the one hand what's good for the business and what they'd like to do, but then on the other you have swaths of different populations that require different means to get support. And that's kind of a misalignment in what those two different groups might need. So it's a small but very real example that on a day-to-day we might see when these two sides are not in alignment. So put it another way, design is a discipline that optimizes how customers and businesses are interacting so that each can achieve their desired outcomes. So with that in mind, let's see where service design may fall in that design environment we're talking about. So in this particular graphic, and I think it's a good segue into what makes service design different than say product or UX design, you can see that it's more encompassing than the latter, and it offers a wider opportunity for solutions, for creating solutions. So you've got, it really sees things as a more of an ecosystem or a system of tools rather than just the tool itself. It's really seeing the organization and the people that are operating within that ecosystem and then coming down with specific solutions to create. So in product design or UX, when designing a specific touch point, someone, whoever they might be, a client, a product owner, a business owner, may say to you, hey, I want this thing. I need you to design this interface for me with X, Y, Z. And in that realm, you will go through your product design process, and then you'll end up with perhaps an enhanced version of the thing that you started with. But in service design, because of its broader approach, you don't necessarily know what solution may come at the end of it. It may not be an enhanced interface. It could potentially be something entirely different. It could be a restructuring of organizational patterns. It could be an unboxing experience. What it could be very different than what you started with. But that's kind of the beauty of it. You don't already know or have the solution in hand because you are starting before then. You're starting with those questions before. And it leaves the potential for something far greater than just what you think you're starting with. By not closing yourself off to particular ways of solving problems, thinking of solutions, or finding ways to connect that meaning that will resonate with people, resonate with your users, both inside and outside of the business. So how does a service designer or any designer or technologist think in this way? Think of service design like how one would operate a theater. You have different layers, different stakeholders, and different lines of visibility from the perspective of your users and your internal stakeholders. You've got your audience, you've got your front stage, your backstage, perhaps your backstage, storage, you get the picture. Think of your audience as your users, the front stage is your product, backstage is the support and organization, and then the way back, you have rules, regulations, policies, budget, compliance, you name it. And they all matter. They're all very important in the process of creating a service. This illustrates how broadly service design thinks. It applies design methods and craft to products, communications, interactions, operations, culture, and the structure of an organization. So service design is important because the tools and the methods of service design orchestrate how people, process, and technology are coming together to deliver unparalleled customer experiences. There's another way to think of how service differs from product design because it's broad and it's very much focused on designing the ecosystem and orchestrating human-centered touch points in a given organization. It allows us to not only see things as interconnected, but also design them and build them in that way too. So with that being said, let's get into the good stuff. And how do you actually do this? How can we utilize those tools of service design to in your own design practice and ways in which we can actually optimize your organization through the use of service design? So in my own case, I was, like I said earlier on in the presentation, I was hired on for this specific product that had a lot of disparate issues with it. So we were first introduced with this situation. We were tasked with a product that was very much exciting for the business, but was new, untraversed territory for our users. So in many ways, it was really great for our business. It gave us market independence. It was cheaper. It was faster. It was more efficient. It was all those good things. but there's no real solid benefit to the users. It was great for the business, but it really hadn't been decided what is working for the users and how are we using that to our benefit. And we later found out through research and understanding the situation that the product was actually still seen as a huge point of stress on sales teams and support organizations because these questions really hadn't been thought out yet. And the reason, as we had a hunch and was kind of later confirmed, in our process of research, was we had this new product and it was perched upon just a tangle of systemic design problems that was hindering its success. And with that information, we first approached the process with a question: how can we enhance and innovate the experience, this new product, for the betterment of both of our customers and our internal users? So this is kind of a high-level way of how we would approach it when in service design, and it looks a lot like product design. But again, we're thinking about it in a much broader understanding. So we're not thinking about just specifically how do we align the product X, Y, Z. We're thinking organizations, people, and different processes. So in alignment and planning, a lot of the tools that come in this process are journey mapping, assumptions. You run interviews, you're just wrapping your head around the context, aligning and perhaps even workshops to understand and discuss. So we understand the aspects of business and the goals and actions that we need to take to align everyone. In mapping, and this is really where research comes into play. We actually have to understand that current system. So in this project, as with any service design project, the research is key because you have to come up with all of the different touch points and understand what that current system looks like. Ideation and envisioning is really the kind of the fun aspect of it, which is once we have all of these different touch points and we take those research insights into consideration, how do we ideate and think about how all of these things come together? And then evolutioning and planning and piloting, which is where this current project is. So back to that product, we first had to understand, okay, what is the context and the issues that this product has now? What are we trying to fit it into? What were the different service propositions that were originally asked for, so on and so forth. And then we needed to go in and analyze and then research that, uncover those insights, and then design and build it. One of the biggest tools that we would use in service design, and that's your service blueprint. And essentially, in your service blueprint, this is where you're going to capture everything and all of those different groups together. And it's very different than a journey map, just because again, we're thinking in that broad lens. So we're thinking we've got our evidence, we have our customer journey as one element of it. And then thinking back to that theater analogy, you have those front stage actions, those backstage actions, and then the support processes that follow. So in this project, when we were working, we started out with a template. So we wanted to understand who are our stakeholders, what's the problem, what are the kind of current support processes that we understand, just setting up our blueprint to then go into research and know what we needed to find. And then we could then better understand where we could align those goals. So into research, these were the major things that we focused on in the research process. So we really kept it qualitative. We were focusing on interviews, focus groups, software demos, all that kind of stuff, and then insights. So taking that research and then turning it into insights that we could then use in our service blueprints. And then the experience map, which is huge, is how can we actually map that end-to-end process to understand all of those different touch points that are important for the service to actually function. And then developing really specifically personas and archetypes within that. So we really understood very fully who our people were, who is the organization, who is the customer, and developing that in the context of that service blueprint. So in this particular project, the purpose of the research was to understand the stakeholders' processes and experience. That meant talking to sales channels, support associates, relationship managers, product teams, and most importantly, actual external merchants that would be using the product that we were delivering. We ran focus groups with these different workbenches and managers to understand what that process was like, some of their frustrations, and then we did demos with the software and then analyzed that competitor feedback alongside of our own work. This is an example of one of the maps that we put together. So this is an end-to-end journey of one of the people that we were able to focus on. And this is really detailed. But what was great about going through this process, we were able to map out at a very detailed level what someone's process was like, what are the pain points and where do they exist? And then how does that map to not only how people feel about the system, but then the opportunities they present from a service perspective. So again, we're thinking about it, we take a step back and we look at that system, and rather than having the solution in hand already, such as a product, we were like, what are those opportunities? What could potentially exist in these spaces that could be very beneficial for the system overall, and then focus on delivering those in specific touch points. This is an example of a persona or an archetype that we had put together. And this is another example of using a level of zoom. So this is kind of your overall process and experience. We're looking at multiple different groups. We're looking at multiple different touch points. Here, we're looking at a specific touch point. We're thinking very specifically about this one use case within the broader context of everything. And it's important because when you have this overall view, it can be very overwhelming, and it's very overwhelming to see where can we start? Where can we start? Which touch point? What is the opportunity? It's a great roadmap. It's a great vision for what something could potentially be and where you can go. It's basically a treasure map in some ways. You look at it and you're like, oh, look at all of these different opportunities and wonderful things we can create. But this is where you can actually start to really see the actions that you can take with specific channels. And this is really important because when you get really detailed about the people you're working with, you can better understand how does that fit into the overall context, and how do we align both people's specific roles in the broader context of the organization. So what we found after this research process was we had 40 plus steps across internal stakeholders. We had 12 major pain points that we came up with. And that actually mapped very easily into 6 key opportunities. We found that by mapping out our template, by then doing the research and then going back and looking at it, we found 6 really great opportunities where we can go forward with the design process. So this is an example of how we were able to do that. We took the pain point, we mapped it to the color, the color was essentially mapped to the specific issue or 6 opportunities that we saw, and then we mapped them into the different verticals that we saw as potentially being solved. So this kind of going back to your service blueprint, once you have all of that customer journey mapped, you can then go back to your service blueprint and start to see where you can map those 6 key opportunities. So kind of as we did here, where we had all of these different things, such as communication issues, manual processing, material and packaging. We were able to take those 6 key opportunities and then map them to our services. And this is really important, where you can see your primary focus is the customer and how it's mapping to your organization. I'd also like to say that this is a great way to get people on board with what you're trying to do. When you align it to the business and the business strategy, you're starting to see how the user ties in with the whole experience. As a designer, we know this. We're human-centered. We're focused on that. It's really important to keep that in mind. But a lot of times, the business isn't thinking in that way. They're thinking in a very different way. So when they see that the customer journey mapped onto the internal processes, and again, with thinking about those lines of visibility and what the merchant is actually seeing, and it starts to turn people onto your side, and why design can be really helpful and important in the overall process of designing services. 3 things we want to capture when we are aligning the customer journey and the business are props, people, and processes. So props would be your products or the physical and digital artifacts. So in our case, we had one of those. That was the original prompt for how we were going to design the services, which was this new technology on this piece of hardware. Then we had the people. So we had merchants, we had the different stakeholders internally, we had the business, and we wanted to map both the props and the people together and align those things. And then next was processes. So different workflows, different procedures. So for example, if you're doing an onboarding workflow, or for example, if there's a specific support task that needs to happen and it flows in a specific way, capturing those different workflows and how that touches the people in the different groups, and then how that is operating in the context of the prop that you're focused on. When you have all of those things in tandem together on a map, all mapped out, you really can start to see all of the different ways that things are interacting together, and you can actually design things that are far more intuitive for the system. And I think one of the most important things about the service blueprint is the empathy triangle. And I took this from another talk that I heard on service design, which I thought was great, was the empathy triangle is essentially, you take all of these different aspects of the business, you have it blueprinted out, it's a roadmap. But what you're really doing is you are making sure that everyone feels valued and you empathize with each group in the process, because it really just isn't about the tool that you're delivering, it's about the people. When you're thinking about it in this kind of holistic view, we're thinking about the stakeholders in a really intuitive way, that we're not just trying to deliver a specific product better, we're trying to deliver the services across the board better. So for example, if I have a software that's really causing hiccups internally, that's hindering this product that I'm trying to deliver, service design would take a step back and say, it's not the product that we should be trying to optimize, it's that internal service that we should be looking at as well. And how can we fit that into the overall vision of what this product is by thinking about it in a service manner? So it's about people, it's not about tools. It's really about aligning the different people in the different processes, and making sure that we can focus on them as a holistic vision. We've done all of the research, we've got our blueprint, we've done the hard work. Basically we've got everything figured out, and your brain's already going off. We've got tons of ideas or solutions that we could potentially come up with, the overall scenario. So project, we really focused on these 4 things, and this can vary depending on products or services, but in our case, we really wanted to ideate and come up with tons of ideas across the board as to how we could fit it, into our blueprint. There were things that we could do now, and the business would love this, the low-hanging fruit that you can focus on versus the long-term things that it needs to become in order for it to be a successful service. So thinking about it in this manner and creating a framework by which you solve that is really helpful for aligning both your customers, so you start to help the customer right away, but also the business. I think that's really important. Then vision stories. We really focused on personas and archetypes to essentially empathize with each side of the business. And then vision stories for what should that person's process be like. So for example, a sales rep, what's the vision of their role? If they have so many steps that they're having to deal with, what can we do and how can we envision their future role in the broader context of the service? Same thing with the customer. If we have the current customer experience, what is the vision story for what that's going to be like? And then my favorite, which is storyboarding. So how do we put all of these wonderful touch points that we have now ideated and designed together? How does that fit into an overall process? And this is a very visual method for envisioning all of those different components coming together for your future experience. It's also a great way to tell a story. So when you are pitching all of these different ideas to your organization, when you storyboard it, you can really show people how it all fits together. You've kind of done the hard work of seeing the vision and seeing the future for where it can go, and then all of the research to back you up in the process. Example of a vision story that we did for Phil 2.0, which was our sales rep that I had shown previously. And versus all of those different pain points that we originally saw, nice, seamless process. This was the vision for what Phil's job would be like. And it had really actionable evidence for it. We had different things that we could do right away to make this happen. And it was really helpful to see it on kind of a projected timeline and a process, because we could see how all of those things would map on together. The storyboard that I had done just to understand how all of these different touch points would come together. It could be as rudimentary as a comic strip like you see here, but doing the storyboard and really showing how all of these different pieces come together, how people are interacting with that product, how is that product delivered, who's delivering that product within the service altogether, really, really helpful for people to see. And it's better than a roadmap, it's a vision. People can then see all of these things that they've been working on come together, come to life. And then, which is essentially, for me, mind mapping is really helpful. So seeing how the connected solution operates all together and kind of all of these different interactions. It's really rapid, it's really fast, but it's really just making sure that you get everything down on paper and you see how they all connect. And then, maybe in the corner scribbling your top focuses for the end of the year. But really, this is supposed to be a really quick way to get your ideas down on paper, and they could span the gap for whatever you think the solution might be. And then this was our prioritization framework. So thinking about it and breaking down all of those fabulous ideas, sketching them out, and then placing them into a kind of linear timeline as to what needs to be solved, and then breaking that down really specifically. So thinking about internal environments and communications and mapping that as one prioritization, packaging and materials as the next. Onboarding UI, we saw actually as a great opportunity as a product itself to offer in this broader journey, because it could help other processes in the meantime. And then support materials and help guides, because it was something that was in dire need of a redesign. And then seeing those all together, that became the service. We saw that you had your internal processes, you had these external touch points with a merchant, as well as new products that we could offer that kind of fit together to deliver this product in a new way, as a service, not just as a tool for our merchants or for our business. So where we are now with this product is really focusing on delivery and iteration and improvement through planning and just doing the prototyping and piloting process. But I think one thing to keep in mind when you get to this stage in service design is maintaining your feedback loops. And when I say feedback loops, what I really mean is maintaining the relationships with your stakeholders. It's really important to always ask for feedback, always sense when you are delivering these things and get that feedback and maintain those connections, because they will be the keys to adapting it in the future and making sure that it continually evolves to that ultimate future state that you want it to be in. So to maintain those relationships, it will help you adapt your design and create it faster in the future. So process and this fifth way of thinking resonates with you. What service design needs from you is to know that products don't live on their own. It's really important to remember that, and we all kind of know this, we're in it every day, but it's good to pull back and think beyond just the product that we're working on, and think, what are the different touch points that come into play as we are delivering this product and designing in that manner. What you end up coming up with is a way to actually create interconnected and unified platforms that increasingly are more valued in the world today. Your stakeholders are the keys to your success. Maintaining those relationships, getting the feedback from them, always maintaining those relationships with your stakeholders is not only the key to the success in service design, but the key to the success in a product. I think it's really important to always maintain those relationships and get the feedback from them. And that's really important, especially in research and data phases where we're collecting and we're trying to understand who are our users, how do they operate in that kind of theater analogy, where do they stand, where is the line of visibility with the external customer, and maintaining those relationships with everyone, because it will build a better service. Don't be afraid to wear many hats and to allow ourselves to kind of be the jack of all trades in these scenarios. So when it comes to service design, especially, you're in the mindset of multiple different people. You're trying to empathize with not only what they do, but who they are. And I think it's important to don't be afraid to use and think in their way, and think, from their experience, from their context. The more you do that, and the more that you can then document that in the broader realm of services, and just like, say, for example, in your service blueprints, the more you'll start to see the connections, and the more you'll start to source those opportunities to design better. And as you can see, I love to document all of this and do the experience maps and do the journeys and get the research down into visuals. So my advice would be to over communicate and then visualize it. I think it's great to constantly be a part of that feedback loop. Always bring your ideas to the table, but also be very much willing to listen and maintain that relationship. And then visualize it, because lots of times, both from the customer's perspective and from the business, people haven't envisioned what it is supposed to look like. And I think one of the key successes of using service design as a practice is visualizing, what do you see as your future state? what is it currently versus what that future state should be, and designing it in such a way where you can see it all come together. So visualization is really key to the success of service design and the success of a product. And lastly, mistakes are your best friends. It's okay to not have all of the answers. That's why we maintain those relationships with stakeholders. Because ultimately, when you deliver something and you want to go back and adapt, having those relationships and making those mistakes or along the process, ultimately it builds a better service. I think it's really important to think about it in such a way where it's a conversation with the customers and the business together and maintaining that relationship. So again, from one of my favorite books, Thinking in Systems, we can't impose our will on the system. We can listen to what the system tells us and discover how its properties and our values can work together to bring forth something much better than could even have been produced by our will alone. And I think that's a really important aspect of service design. And that's kind of the conclusion to the whole thing, is that the system can be designed. We just have to think through that broader lens of services, and we have to think about the people and not the tools in the process. Are interested in this, I definitely recommend. There's tons of books out there and tons of resources that were very helpful for me, especially as I was learning and getting on my journey with service design. Lots of websites, lots of simple websites such as servicedesignbooks.org or servicedesignTools.org. But I very much recommend, if this is interesting to you and this is where you would like to invite this into your own design practice, I definitely recommend this. And thank you. That's everything I've got.
Woohoo! Thank you, Emily. That was so fun to watch. I loved what we had discussion about how fun the illustrations were and how much they helped understand what you were talking about, convey the meaning behind it, and what a great tool to bring to your teams. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have a question. I loved also how you emphasized those stakeholder relationships. I think that's probably one of the bigger pain points, for designers, is how do we know who to build relationships with, and how do we maintain those and like get them on our side, with what we want to do. And so I'm curious, between when you were first assigned this project to when you were able to really dive into some of these design thinking approach strategies, were the stakeholders expecting this kind of scope, or were they surprised when you presented, hey, we want to do all of this to create a solution, and how did you make a case for that?
I think that's a great question, because I definitely think how we framed it to our stakeholders was first the low-hanging fruit that we could accomplish today, and then through the research and the data that we were able to compile, what we think the future state of this should look like. In my case, the stakeholders already had an idea that they wanted this future state. They wanted to create something. So I was lucky in that sense that I had someone who was willing to listen to, thinking about it in more broad terms. But I think where we were able to balance it out was actionable items today. What can we do today to start working towards that overall vision? So I think when it comes to stakeholders, and perhaps someone that's not as familiar with design process, and someone who might be shocked by seeing all of this work and all of the things that might have to change, I think the best thing to do is come to the table with things that you can action today, things that make sense and are, from the business perspective, probably like the low-hanging fruit, versus things that are more structural changes. But I think showing the value of those structural changes through the research, through the data, and then those future states, I think is massively helpful, because when people see this, when they see the system, sometimes it kind of then registers with them, wow, I didn't realize that that person had to do 40 steps in their process to get something done. That's terrible. And that's the reason why perhaps it's so inefficient. Maybe we should, as a business strategy, focus on that. How you start to evangelize people. journeys, showing the experience of another starts to allow others to empathize with it. Because when you're working within those silos, sometimes it's hard to break those barriers. And I think visualization really helps in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Showing the experience of another is key to building empathy and getting that broader buy-in. Did you have support to do the research you needed to create that, or to convey that experience of all these different players in the service process? Did you have that to start with, or did you have to get support for, or get buy-in for that too?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both. I think for this project worked across a couple regions, and I think it's an interesting question because some regions were very willing to open up and illuminate aspects of their business and let you have those interviews. I was working with another researcher, and we were putting together questions and documentation, and then having interviews with different stakeholders in the systems. And one region was super willing to say, hey, yes, like have interviews with all these people. We'd love to hear their feedback. Like we want that feedback. And then in other cases, you have people who are, we don't really want to do that. We don't see that as helpful for the business. We don't understand why you need to talk to them, et cetera. And I think the idea was that when we were able to get some leverage with that one region and actually then do the visualization and show, then all of a sudden the other regions started to get buy-in. They were like, oh, this actually could be really helpful to understand. Or for example, rather than us having to assume what the future state should be, perhaps we already have the answer in the groups that are working together. We just have to essentially visualize it in this way. So I think on the one hand, you get buy-in some places and then not others, but ultimately it comes to, if you start to talk with those stakeholders, run those interviews, and just document and visualize as much as you can, and then use that to your advantage. Because ultimately, as a designer, my best tool is my ability to visualize. So when I can show that, and it basically helps my case for moving forward in the future and evolving those plans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So like finding the open doors and going through them.
Exactly.
Going through the open doors first. Yeah. And
exactly.
Always something I've really relied on in my UX journey career has been like, if you do the process, then the process proves itself. And it's so much more effective than trying to have a meeting about it. Like, do the process and create the visual and show the results, and that they sell themselves.
I totally agree with that. I really do think that showing the process and focusing on that, and then kind of pitching it to your stakeholders, or for example, if you're working with a project manager that's unfamiliar with that process, I think giving them context to how you work is really helpful. I know when I was presenting all of the research findings, what I made sure to do was kind of talk about what we did in the first place. So rather than just showing them the maps, we talked about the process first, how much work and blood, sweat, and tears went into actually putting those maps together. Because I think when people see the effort and just how much it goes into the process too, and then you see the maps come to fruition, I think people definitely resonate with that. So I definitely think when it comes to showing people that vision, show them the process at the same time, because when people see what you've done to come to your conclusions, you have more buy-in then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. Awesome. Thank you.
Emily, would it be possible for you to show us that list of the books?
Yeah, absolutely.
And just kind of display that on the screen so that people have a chance to write the information down and get it? Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And if you'd like me to share this presentation out, I can definitely do so as well.
Yes, well, it's recorded and we'll post it on the Techlahoma channel, I think, on YouTube and Twitch. So yes, please share it.
Yeah, great.
So who were your key collaborators with you on the ground, like doing the work of all of this?
Yeah, so what I would say is we didn't originally start out with a multidisciplinary team. Essentially, we really started out with the design people. So it was me, it was my design partner, and a researcher. And we were, doing our best to try to do it. But what we did along the process was start to build relationships across the organization. So have people we could talk to in sales, have people we could talk to within, the different support groups, have people we could talk to from a product side. And the more that we built those relationships and, asked for their feedback and their process or validate, data that we were finding, the more that we were able to start to have that open connection with them and have essentially their help as the process moved forward. And then when we got the okay for a lot of these different design tools, then what happened was the team got much bigger. So then it became a very multidisciplinary team where we had support people on the call, we had people in product on the call, as well as marketing, et cetera. And what was really exciting was it just kind of happened organically because we started to build those relationships and people saw the value of all being in the same room together and having these conversations. Rather than making assumptions about what people were doing or what direction people were going, to start building and having meetings with people in kind of in a multidisciplinary fashion was very, very helpful for us.
Wow. And how did the project management of all of that evolve over time? Are you keeping track of all of this, or did you get a resource for it?
Yeah, no. So in each region, there's a different project manager for this particular product. And what we essentially did was we built a relationship with them. And then kind of, it started out as almost as like consulting, just trying to test the waters, is this possible? Is this feasible within your timeframes? Can we do this? And now it's a weekly cadence of meetings with each region, working with the different project managers to roadmap this system into their own roadmaps. But what's helpful is now that they've seen how we think and we see in this kind of multidisciplinary fashion, it's been very helpful working with them so they can kind of see and anticipate where we're coming from and where we're going.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So is there a master roadmap or what kind of time frame have you all put on this? And what are some of the shorter and longer term milestones you're hoping to reach?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, there is definitely a master time frame, which is ever evolving, especially when you've got a project of this size. You definitely see things change. And in this time of COVID, we've definitely had to alter the way we do things, especially when it comes to pilot and releasing new stuff, because obviously it's much harder to find in-person customers, and it's much harder to have those relationships. But what we were able to do is, so I can scroll back to this slide. So some of the things that we saw from this kind of prioritization framework was we could work on doing packaging and materials and onboarding UI and the support materials right off the bat. Those were things that we could attack right away. Versus some of the internal environment and communication aspects of the process, as those were equal in value to making things happen. But in terms of what we could accomplish today, we really focused on the packaging, the materials, and the onboarding UI, and focused on that line of visibility between the merchant and our internal businesses. Because that we figured we could mitigate some of the issues that were happening with the customer while adapting our own internal system to better serve them in the future. So we really did focus initially on what can we do with the customer today that would actually help or kind of take the load off of internal users. And then what we did was we made a plan, which is kind of in a phase right now to how are we adapting that internal environment so we can increase the efficiency of how all of these things are released essentially.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Yeah, it sounds like you're really leveraging the snowball effect for this whole process and building up the collaboration and the trajectory.
Definitely. I also think we focused on pretty visual aspects too. And this was just per who we were working with. They wanted to see results. They wanted to see things happen. They wanted to see things change. And what we found was by adapting some of our systems that were very visible to the merchant, it was leverage for the business to keep going, because the more external feedback that they were getting that things were going really well, they really liked this, they liked this direction, the more that they found buy-in to kind of make those bigger structural changes to benefit all of the things that we were doing with the merchant. And I think that's also another key is wins for the business do matter. You know, we want to think in the context of, you know, what can we do to leverage our position as a business as well. So doing things that were, you know, vibrant and physical and good things for the customer, things that really mattered for the customer, gave us even more buy-in to make those internal structural changes.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's focus on improving the public facing UI first, or facing experience. Yeah.
Yes.
Relate to that.
Yeah, I can definitely give a key example, which is support. So support has been something that we've been trying to develop and make more intuitive for our users. And one thing we realized throughout the process of research was how dissonant some of our support models were. You know, it didn't make sense why we were contacting people, when we were contacting them, how we were contacting them. And we found that that was one of those things that we could leverage both from a business perspective to make lives easier internally, but also then focus on making that service and support experience for the merchant far more intuitive than it was. And that was a great way to align the two sides of the business, because you know, you were helping people in the support teams, you know, come up with a much more regular cadence to talk with merchants. But at the same time, merchants felt far more at ease because it wasn't constantly chasing up different channels of our business to try to sort something out. And I think that was a great win overall.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Beautiful. Love it. Have you been able to put any numbers or metrics to like the results of this process? Like, has it saved money on development work or improved satisfaction score or anything like that?
Yeah, again, another great question. One thing we really wanted to focus on was we had a team that was collecting sales performance data, so really quantitative data as to you know, the sales of the product. And what we realized was when we looked at the sales performance data versus the qualitative feedback that we were getting, we saw that, you know, it was the systems that we were dealing with were very much hindering the performance that was happening on the ground and the actual revenue streams. So what we have done since is in pilot have started to track those sales performance data metrics to make sure that, you know, kind of where we were going and where, you know, where we're headed, we can track it from that perspective. And I think it's a great point. Having quantitative metrics and ways to measure that success are really important in that overall scheme. Because again, that's another way that you'll get buy-in to overall service design. When you can find a metric that's very quantifiable, you can definitely, you know, use it to your advantage as to why it's important. And we've definitely seen a difference in that sales performance, which I think is really interesting, that already there's a difference, especially related to like a cool-off period when people perhaps would return their product. That has started to come down, that started to decrease in its very early days. So that's exciting because already the numbers have started to shift in our favor.
Congratulations, that's fantastic. Does it feel good? Are you proud?
It does, but I certainly feel like we have a long way to go, because I guess the one downside to feeling being a service designer is you're like, ooh, like that's a lot, you know. There's like so many more things to come.
Especially all remote.
Yes, that has been a whirlwind, especially when it comes to designing packaging of any kind, and you're trying to do that from the confines of your home. That's a tough one, but it's certainly been rewarding, even more so being in that in a remote environment and seeing things still work and play to your advantage.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, props to you. Yeah. So you've gotten to do a lot of kind of across the spectrum design approaches, and in this field, the roles can be kind of muddy, or the ownership can be kind of muddy about who does what. How do you make a distinction between a service designer and a UX researcher or a product designer? Where would you kind of put lines around those roles?
Yeah, I think it's tough, especially when you're working for a company that doesn't have specifically defined roles. Perhaps if I was at Google or another place that really has their design framework set, and they have the ability and bandwidth to define service designer versus a UX designer versus et cetera, a researcher. I think in my case, and in the places that I've worked, I've definitely had to wear many hats and almost see myself as a designer, and UX is the practice, service is the practice, or research is a part of your practice. To distinguish when the business just requires you to do multiple things at once. But what I would say is the biggest distinction for me with service design is it's the intangible organization of things versus the product itself. And research is a means by which you can get to service design. So when you're using service design as a practice, it's really a broad lens at which you're looking at everything, and it's kind of orchestrating all of the other aspects of the design process. So for example, here we had 5 different products technically, but the service was the interaction of all of those products together, and the research was the means by which we were able to find what that interaction process should look like. So I think it depends. It's tough. It's a hard question to answer. But I would say it's really how you are looking at the problem and the ways in which you want to solve that problem. For me, that's the biggest distinctions between them. That's probably how I'd answer that one.
Yeah, thank you. And it's an evolving question or evolving answer, even how it's being put into practice. So I really like that approach of I'm a designer, and it's which method that I'm picking up or which perspective I'm picking up to solve the problem at hand.
For sure.
Well, last call, I think I've gotten all the questions. Last call, well, I ask one more, which is, what tool do you use to make your illustrations?
Ooh, yes. So I actually designed all of this in Figma, because Figma actually has a great like a pencil tool that you can use to draw, and then I use a Cintiq, so a Wacom Cintiq to actually do my drawings. As an industrial designer, I got very used to the digital illustrations, and then I've just kind of made it a part of my practice to keep going. But if you can get yourself a tablet where you can draw, the Cintiq tablet's fabulous, and it's a great way to kind of embed these different drawings and illustrations, and even mind mapping into your process. So definitely recommend that tool.
Thank you. Awesome. Yeah, I'm inspired. I want to do more illustration too after watching this presentation.
Awesome. Yeah, no, love it. It's a great visual tool.
Yay. Thank you. Well, thank you, Emily. We loved having you. This was great. Definitely a rewatch presentation. So we'll be sharing this out, and please share. You've got a great presentation to share out with your community as well. So please share widely. A couple more announcements for our community here in Oklahoma City, or in our digital community space as well. We've got our May and June meetups lined up. It's always the last Wednesday of the month. So on May 26th, our meetup will be a panel discussion talking about the how to handle the complexities of a design to engineering handoff. How do you make your vision come to life in reality? And then in June, we've got a group from New York City, our Stephen Wakabayashi from the QT BIPOC community will be, design community will be doing a presentation on Doji, and it's on inclusivity and diversity.
That's correct.
Yep. Okay, great. June is Pride Month, so we'll be celebrating by learning with those fine designers from New York. So we welcome the community from outside Oklahoma City. Thanks y'all for attending, for watching. Thanks again, Emily, and be in touch.
Yeah, of course. Thanks again, everyone. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Yay.